Jack was a heartthrob. He was a real dinky-die movie star.
I am sure there is a part of Jack Thompson who would prefer people to remember him as the handsome actor with the gravelly voice who did these iconic movies.
The fact of the matter is that war changes men's natures.
But he's telling his story about dialysis to help the Purple House and the Purple Truck because he knows this is a really good news story.
It's a wonderful irony, given Jack's long-time interest in and passion for Indigenous causes, that it was the Indigenous people there that came to Jack's rescue in his hour of need. That's a wonderful story.
When we heard that Jack was struggling, we reached out and said if there's anything that we need to do, then we'll do it, and we'll manage it together.
They have made it possible for my career to continue when it could very well have come to a kind of full stop right there.
"18 months after I started working as a professional actor, the first beginning of the renaissance of an Australian film industry occurred. It was like this rising wave, and I was riding it. It was attractive looking, but also the acting had range.
Dislike me not for my complexion, the shadowed livery of the burnished sun, to whom I am a neighbour and near bred.
Maybe Jack was one of the very first ones in the 70s who, when you saw him on screen, you thought, this actor's as good as any actor in the world.
I love this club, and I love football, and I will not tolerate anyone who holds them both in contempt.
There's no doubt that Jack has become an iconic actor in Australia. The Man from Snowy River, you hear that poem and you almost think Jack.
For most of my life, my health's been pretty good. About 2 years ago, I started to notice that something wasn't quite right. The symptoms were swelling of the ankle joints and knees and pain in the limbs. I found it very painful to walk.
We all kind of put it down to Jack just getting a bit older, but eventually he kind of started to diminish mentally. And I think that was part of the reason why he didn't go and see a doctor earlier, is because his actual sickness was affecting his mental capacity.
I got a phone call from one of the oncologists one morning saying we had Jack Thompson in the emergency department. He was really sick and had severe kidney damage. And I said, "The Jack Thompson?" And of course he said, "Yes, the Jack Thompson." And I saw this desperately unwell man coming in virtually at death's door. I think if he'd been another 12, 24 hours, he may not have survived.
So I was told that I had renal failure, major kidney problem.
I never thought that end-stage renal failure would have anything to do with me. Although I did have a bout with prostate cancer.
Jack's prostate cancer led to bladder outlet obstruction, and that leads to the kidney damage. So the chance of recovery was low.
It came as a shock to realise that Jack was in extremis. He'd been very close to death. This was a mortal challenge. Would he actually survive this?
I was incredibly worried that we would lose Jack. I mean, we almost did.
He would not be suitable for transplantation. So we sat down and I had the conversation, said, "Look, Jack, it's really time to dialyse."
And my wife said at the time to Dr. Penny, "Is there an alternative to the dialysis?"
So I said, well, in the end, I said, we have a dialyzed Jack or we have a dead Jack, and there's no middle ground to this. And I think that was fairly blunt, but it got the message through.
All right, Jack, I've come to have a look at your dialysis today, all right?
I started to think about how this would affect my career as an actor pretty much immediately. Does that mean I can't work anymore?
Your blood pressure's very good and your arterial's fine, so that's all good.
It's unbelievably difficult to maintain a film career when you're on dialysis 3 times a week. It would have been the end of a really, really big, important era in Australian cultural life. No question.
Thanks for hooking me up.
That's all right.
Inevitably, I started to think about how this would affect the making of a film that I had been wanting to make for 6 or 7 years. The movie is called High Ground. The setting of the film is East Arnhem Land. There is no dialysis out there.
Jack was very much involved with the development of the script and trying to pull the forces together to make the film. And then suddenly he wound up in hospital. You know, would he ever see the film? Would he ever be part of that film?
None of us thought he'd be able to do the project High Ground at all, in any capacity. And it was devastating.
The reason I wanted to make this film was that it's a very particular Indigenous story that's been dear to my heart for a very long time. It was at Narrabeen in Sydney's north, at a school there, that the Indigenous connection began when I was just 6 years old. And I met a boy at that school called Peter Thompson.
Even at 6, Jack was a charismatic little boy. He was blonde and good-looking, and he loved storytelling, and he was a great imitator. He was a born actor, really. And we just clicked in the schoolyard and became friends.
I was actually born Jack Payne, or John Hadley Payne. At the age of 4, my mother died. My father was at war in Merchant Navy.
So Jack started living with us, and we went to boarding school, which obviously the Thompsons paid for. And then the question was, well, shouldn't this be formalised? And so actually he was formally adopted by and became Jack Thompson in legal terms as well as factual terms.
My adoptive father was John Thompson, a wonderful man. And he had a fascination with Indigenous culture. It was a big turning point for me.
When Sydney University mounted this expedition to Arnhem Land in 1948, John went along with that.
Scientists of the Arnhem Land expedition set out along the Alligator River to gather specimens.
And he was really fired up by the whole drama and richness and colour of Aboriginal life.
Great little theatre this. John Thompson was with the ABC, senior feature writer and producer for ABC Radio.
Well, of course, Bill Harney's known all over Australia as a bushman from the Northern Territory.
This is some footage of him that I've never seen before. Interviewing a bloke called Bill Harney, who'd spent most of his life with the Indigenous people.
Bill, when did you first begin to get acquainted with the Aboriginal people?
Well, I knew him many years ago.
I became totally fascinated by that. And all I really wanted to do was to get out there. At 14, I went off to the cattle station.
That's it.
Inspired by Bill Harney. Because it was just out there, just out the window. It wasn't overseas, it wasn't in South America or Europe or anything. This whole other extraordinary world was right there on my doorstep. I had my 15th birthday on El Kedra Station. I spent a year there working as a jackaroo. Out on the stock camp, I was the only white person there. All the rest were Aliwara men. and they spoke their language.
They treated me as a son, and they took me to heart. They invited me to join in the ceremonies. They recognised that I was, in terms of their culture, ignorant, but they treated me with enormous generosity.
I worked on a sheep station out in Western New South Wales for a while.
And he would come home and tell stories about the men that he worked with, who were real Australian working class guys who lived that life. That furnished him with the raw material that he's used ever since. I think that's what makes him such a unique actor.
I went to Queensland Uni. My hobby of acting started to take over. My hobby became more important to me than my studies, or was beginning to, so I had to make a decision. Then decided that I should give it a shot. Came back to Sydney, joined an agency. 28 auditions later, I had my first yes.
Well, admit it, you were seduced and you liked it.
I think with Jack, what you see is what you get. Down to earth, no nonsense, Aussie bloke.
Well, up your bum.
It's just a joke. Dad's always making jokes.
He's an actor who absolutely epitomises the Australian male in the best sense.
Yes, Major Thomas. This court-martial's unconstitutional, sir.
I think the big one for Jack was Breaker Morant, where he played a very different character against what most people would regard as type, but actually more towards the person he actually is.
But I do know that orders that one would consider barbarous have already been issued in this war.
The other aspect of Jack's life is that he became media fodder, and there was a feeding frenzy about his personal life, which went on for years.
The girls loved Jack, and Jack's reputation went before him, but Jack also had a scandalous reputation. Everybody in the business knew that Jack had this, it was in a menage, an open menage a trois.
Mr. Thompson originally appeared in this magazine apparently as their first nude centrefold. That's right, isn't it?
That's right, I was the first nude centrefold in Cleo magazine.
We were sharing a house and I'm coming back from the muesli in the morning and there's Jack lying on the velvet couch with his hands sort of gracefully carrying his tackle, shall we call it. And I don't think he had quite enough fingers for the tackle, so I think they added an extra finger.
I was saying, hey, nudity's okay. That's not the issue. In a world where we're dropping napalm on children in Vietnam, surely nudity is not an issue.
Jack's always been very socially conscious, I think. He's been an environmentalist. He's been involved, I think, all his life with Indigenous causes. He's very passionate.
For nearly 20 years, I've been going to the annual Garma Festival, the fantastic celebration of Yolngu culture in Arnhem Land. It's actually held on land that my father had visited.
I went up to Goma one year because of Jack's encouragement, and we were on the parade ground. And we realised we were actually standing on the ground that John Thompson had stood on 30 years before, 40 years before. So that was a powerful moment.
We stood there together and it was as if our father was there.
It was very moving to realise that our lives had arced around to this point where we were actually connecting again with our own family history.
The first time I went to Garma, something really important happened to me. Mundawa Yunupingu from the Yothu Yindi Band asked me to speak out against a plan by the Northern Territory government to do away with bilingual education.
It's extremely important for any community, for the sanity of the individuals, for the sanity of the community, for the dignity of the people themselves, for the dignity of humankind, that it has its own voice. It is a wicked crime against humanity.
At the end of the festival, he came to me and said, "We want to make you a member of the family. We want to make you a Gumach man, Yunupingu, and we want to give you a name, and that name is Gulkula. And that's the name of the site." And I was very touched, very moved, and I said, "It's a great honour, mate." And I said, "But I'm awake up to you. It's a job too, isn't it?" And he said, "Yo."
To be known as Jack Thompson means that you've got some pretty big responsibilities out that way. Jack hasn't arrived in the community acting like a movie star. He's been quite instrumental in the way that Gama's fashioned over the years. You know, he has used his profile and his role to draw people into the region. And he's brought some amazing people out there, you know, really high-profile people. He uses his time as a mentor, as an advisor. His ambassador role is something that he's sewn on. It's in his DNA. He can't get rid of it.
Mundawa and I became great friends. We became, in Yolngu terms, brothers, of course. I saw Mundawa go on to dialysis. I saw him diminish, really. But he chose to come off dialysis and to slowly pass away. And that was his choice. You know, it was a dignified choice. At the time my dear friend and brother Mundawa died, I had no idea that in a few years' time it'd be me needing dialysis to stay alive and me facing the possible end of my career if I couldn't get dialysis on remote film sets. It looked like I would have to pull out of the High Ground movie. But then something quite unlikely and quite wonderful happened. So if I have to work, for example, as I worked up here, then I would get in touch with you.
Yes, and we'd organise for your dialysis. So I'm the clinical nurse consultant for renal at St Vincent's, and I said, "Oh, I know the woman you need to speak to." So I got on the phone and I rang Sarah, said, "We're dialysing Jack Thompson." She went, "Really?" And I went, "Yes, and he wants to go up to the Territory and he's going to be filming a movie. What do you reckon? Do you think he can help?"
When I walked into the room, Jack had just finished his first dialysis and he looked really sad. There was this big man with this big personality and this huge life sitting in a hospital chair next to a hospital bed in a gown, looking crook. And so we sat down and I told him about the purple house and the purple truck, and we started to plot on how we could work together to make sure that he did these things.
I came to the Northern Territory as a remote area nurse and I completely fell in love with the place. The landscape was fabulous and the people are sensational.
I told Jack that Purple House had been started by Pintupi people from the Western Desert, At the time there was no dialysis outside the hospital system in Central Australia, so they painted some beautiful pictures. They raised $1 million at the Art Gallery of New South Wales in one night and started to work together to set up dialysis on country. It's the only dialysis centre we know of that's got chickens and a fire pit and a karaoke machine and a pizza oven. We've got 120 people working for us these days, so I don't know. But we were getting more and more requests, and so we thought, why don't we try and build a mobile unit?
The Purple Truck has done thousands of kilometres around Central Australia getting people home to remote communities on dialysis.
We've rattled many bits off the truck and glued it back up together again. But it's fabulous because it gives people some hope, and also because it can go just about anywhere.
So I said to Jack, we will send the truck to Arnhem Land for you.
I still remember the twinkle coming back in his eye and a great big smile.
We thought about it and said, yes, we have to help him, you know, if he wants to do the job in Jabiru.
I was elated. I was delighted. The tears were tears of joy and gratitude.
It's an extraordinary landscape that has really never been exploited on film in this country before.
High Ground's a very special project for Jack because it sits with a message that he's been trying to put out to the Australian people for a long time, of telling the truth about our past.
This story is based on 3 or 4 very real incidents, and it's set in 1936 in East Arnhem Land, and it's about the Aboriginal resistance to white settlement.
It's the responsibility of those who make history to record it.
It's an extraordinary adventure. Simon Baker plays the lead white man in it.
Jack's been really one of the originators of the movie.
We're done. Good.
He's a living embodiment of the process of reconciliation and righting the wrongs of the past. But it's quite incredible that he can be in this environment, be making this movie, given his problems and his issues and his health.
Hi, Jack.
G'day, mate. Good, good.
I'll get your weight in.
So I would finish the day of filming around 6 o'clock.
There we go. All right, not bad.
Go to dialysis.
Have you been out filming this morning?
Yep,
But it was pretty warm, eh?
it was, but it was good. It was good, yeah.
Lots of work done.
Got all the important stuff done.
Over the 5-hour period, it takes the fluid, the water, out of your blood and the toxins, and then puts the clean blood back through. Finish about midnight, get to sleep about 1, get up again about 5 o'clock the next morning, and back to filming. But I was a very happy man doing that.
What would I complain about? I'm alive. I'm on the right side of the ground, as the old fella says, you know.
People had lots of fun dialysing with Jack. I made Jack promise that he would recite poetry to our nurses, and I actually got bombarded by requests from our nurses from across Australia, fighting to be the ones hanging out with Jack.
You here this morning?
Oh, no, yesterday.
Yesterday, yeah.
Morning, yeah.
I don't know that I'm the only white man to have ever used the purple truck, but I must be one of the rare ones.
Oh yes, in Barunga Clinic they have dialysis, yeah.
Someone said, oh, this will be a turn-up for the books, White Man on Dialysis.
There were some grumbles from unexpected parts when word got out that we were going to do this. Why are you dialysing a white fella? It came from non-Indigenous people.
Well, that's the best thing about the purple truck, isn't it?
Yeah.
That it'll let you come home.
To have Jack sitting there, film star, was really difficult to understand. And heartbreaking at the same time. But, you know, he's such a loved personality that we were going to make it work no matter what. Everybody just pitched in and said, look, we'll just do what we need to do here.
I'm sure if you asked Jack, he would say that he's been repaid in buckets for his interest and loyalty and support of Aboriginal Indigenous issues. It's like a nice piece of karma for him. He seems in great shape, emotionally and spiritually, and it's a source of great satisfaction that high ground has been completed.
People will look at that photo and they'll think, that's what a mad dog looks like when he's laid low.
And it's really allowed him to continue the life that he's lived and be involved in filmmaking and in creative work, and that's a great boon. That's remarkable.
The Commissioner is talking about a full-scale punitive expedition.
He's still got a voice that everybody falls in love with.
I don't need to tell you what happens if this Baywara gets a voice.
Jack might be doing it a bit hard at the moment, but I'm sure he'll figure out a way to carry on.
Jack's been working in this industry for around 50 years. He's just going to keep on doing this because it's his calling.
Now, I'd really like to do my bit to help Purple Truck and what that means to the Indigenous community. I believe that I certainly owe that, at least, to the Purple Truck.
Is this an unlikely story? Clancy of the Overflow having dialysis in Kakadu in a truck owned by and run by Aboriginal people from the desert? Yeah, that's pretty unlikely. I've got a present for you from the desert I brought with me.
Really?
Yeah.
At this time of my life, I'm 78.
I know you love the Erimunga, the bush medicine.
I still feel that life looks good ahead of me.
My wife uses it.
Being alive looks good. And I'm very fortunate to be alive.
I'm sure there's a bit of you that would prefer to be remembered as Cleo Centerfold, rather than known as a fella on dialysis.
No,
and we know you're doing
I would
that
prefer
for us.
actually to be remembered as the man on dialysis associated with the Purple Truck and the Purple House. I really would. I really would. It's a much more worthy contribution.
Oh, Jack, well, you're a star.
Thanks, mate.
Lovely.
Thank you.